What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. And if you're looking for theological education that includes both academic rigor and hands-on ministry experience, we suggest Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Because wherever God calls, Southwestern wants to help you get there. And the best way to experience that is to attend Spring Preview Day on March 31st. You're going to see firsthand all that Southwestern Seminary has to offer. And during your visit, you'll get to tour the campus, speak with faculty, chat with students, and experience the unique campus community of Southwestern Seminary. You can find out more or register today at swbts.edu/preview. Kyle, we are coming to the end of the road. We're getting there. One more to go after this week. But with number 6 on why churches die, this is a pretty obvious one, but it's one we need to talk about. Why churches die, number 6. They fail to reach their community. And we touched on this last week that, if you got good music, you got good preaching and whatever, then magically people are going to come, right? If you preach it, they will come. Kind of the old Field of Dreams model. But no, there's more. It takes some intentionality. And so why churches die, part 6, they fail to reach their community. Kyle, let's talk about that. There's a listicle in this article that we'll put in the show notes. How does this happen? How does a church stop reaching their community? How does a church get more inwardly focused? How can we maybe turn that around? And so there are many ways to do this, to maybe turn your church around and be more outwardly focused. And it needs to be contextual to your own demographics and all. So there's a lot of ways we can go with this. Maybe your church has 12 people, and they're all white, and they're all driving in from an hour, and all around your church is Hispanic. To reach that community, there's going to be a significantly different approach that you're going to have to take, and that's going to largely be probably turning it over to a Hispanic pastor or coming alongside a Hispanic pastor, something like that. So there's a lot of different ways, but we're going to focus on kind of, you're in an area where you still have people you can that you will reach, all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, you're going to reach anybody around you, that kind of deal. You should. But here's what this guy did. Number 1, they focused on falling in love with Jesus again. And this kind of ties some of the things we've been talking about really together. But first and most importantly, we've got to reflect on our salvation. We've got to reflect on his work in our life, what he has done in us, our testimony individually and corporately as a church. And that's going to require time of prayer, times of celebration, times of repentance. But that had to be key throughout is we have to focus on falling in love with Jesus again. And so maybe one of the best ways, and then I'll turn this over to you, one of the best ways you can do that is you got to make sure you're in love with Jesus. You got to make sure your own kind of house is in order and that you're modeling that you're sharing what God is doing in your life and showing a vibrant life and having a vibrant life with Jesus. And that kind of takes us back to what we talked about last week too. So talk about that, Kyle. Focus on falling in love with Jesus.
Yeah. This article is written by David Jackson is a reflection on something that he did, that he led in a community that had changed dramatically, in a church that had not kept up. It can be very easy to begin this from a pragmatic standpoint, right? We need to change the programs. We need to change our worship style. We need to change pews. None of those are bad, but none of them is primary, right? And so focused on falling in love with Jesus. And Matt, you touched on this. It's important to start with the pastor, and who falls in love with Jesus all over again, and then can lead his people to. There's several reasons for this, right? For one, in Revelation 2, when Jesus is addressing the church at Ephesus, they were still doing some good stuff, right? But what was the criticism that Jesus had of it? That you've lost your first love. You've abandoned the love you had at first. So there are all kinds of steps you can take to reach your community, but this has to be first. If you're not in love with Jesus, if that relationship isn't right, you're not going to love your community well. And everything else can just be done in order to get people into your doors. rather than we love Jesus, we love people, we want to see lives transformed by Jesus. And that drives everything else we do. Not we want to change our music so that we can get more people in the doors so that they'll give more money so that we can keep the doors of the church open. Um, it has to be because we love Jesus ultimately.
All right. Number dos. We celebrated the legacy of the church. And
Yeah,
of
that's right.
course, oh man, this probably needs a caveat. Because you've got some folks that think they do. That's all they're thinking about is the past. That's not so much what we're talking about here. We're talking about the legacy of the church, the heroic people of the faith that founded the church, that helped make it what it had been. Not just their actions, but their passions, why they did what they did. And that, he said, renewed a can-do spirit in their hearts and challenged them to be bold in reaching out. This is one of those, like, at times, I remember back in Arkansas, there was a church up the road from our house called the Brand New Church that had been there for a decade or more. And I always wonder, like, at what point does that brand new church become the same old church? That was just kind of my little thing. But, it's kind of like the church plants. That when they get started, there's a whole lot of desperation and a whole lot of motivation and reaching out and all of that kind of stuff because they have to. They don't have anybody. And then if they're not careful, they kind of move into maintenance mode, and maybe those motivations of getting out and going and telling subside to kind of maintaining what they have. And so kind of a shift there is look back to what helped make Mayhill Baptist Church or whatever, First Farmersville, what made it, at the height of its day, when it was thriving, what was happening then, what were their motivations or passions. Find out about that. Do the study, like look and see what happened at their highest moment, when maybe they had revival, what led to that, and maybe that'll renew a can-do spirit in hearts and challenge your people to be bold in reaching out. Kyle, do you have anything for that?
Yeah, there's a difference between idolizing the past and celebrating the past. Idolizing the past would say, this was the best it's ever going to be. If we want to touch that again, we have to do the same things that we did then, right? So if we set up a tent revival in the '50s and that really reached folks, then we got to set up a tent revival again. Um, but when you celebrate the legacy of the church, you look back at, as David said, the founding. Why was this church founded? And in the vast, some churches were founded because they got mad and split from another church down the road. But most of the time, the church was founded to reach that community, reach that neighborhood with the gospel. That's the legacy of your church. And most churches at one point or another were effective in that. And so you look back and you say, this is why our church was planted for this neighborhood. And even if the community has changed dramatically, as most communities have over the past 50, 40, 30 years, you still say our church exists in this location to reach this community, even if that community looks vastly different than it did when the church was planted. And that helps drive then. If you fall in love with Jesus, you begin to love your community well. That drives then the programs and the events that you do and um, the strategies to help reach that community.
All right, number next, move ministry outside the building. Move ministry outside the building. And, that's going to take one step at a time. I know that he said VBS became an event that they held on the lawn as well as in the building. We had community cookouts in our parking lot. Like, they didn't go far, went maybe 10 feet, but they went outside. They did some joint events with their daughter Chinese church next door. These were some easy steps that they took to engage the neighbors on the block that were around, all of that kind of stuff. And they saw great success there. So number 3, move ministry outside the church building whenever you can. That was something that COVID forced us to do at Mayhill.
Yeah, literally, you moved your everything outside.
Yeah, we did the drive-in thing, and we engaged the community because of that, because it was so loud. people, the neighborhood was small enough around us that the speakers or whatever would carry it to the houses, and we had some of them start coming to church because of it. And that was one that COVID forced us to do it and adapt and all of that kind of stuff. But look for some ways to move ministry outside of your church building. And that list could be long, different ways you can do it, like these ideas of VBS or maybe a community-wide type, outreach event outside, tent revival, like we talked about, that kind of deal. But number 4, teach your people to be missionaries. And this has kind of been a theme throughout. We've got to teach our people to be missionaries. And so I like that we saw in his article that they sent a couple from the congregation to the international mission field. But it's not just that. It's not just going across the globe. It's also going across the street and down the road and in our neighborhoods and in our workplaces, our schools, all of that kind of stuff. And that made a difference for them. And that can make the difference for you. We need to teach our people to be missionaries, to live on mission. Of course, that ties us into the last week about, being the church, not just doing the church. Kyle, talk about that real quick.
Yeah. Sending folks to the international mission field is fantastic, but you have a mission field right there in your community. And if you, as the pastor, whether you're volunteer, bivocational, full-time, if you're the only person who's on mission, that's not going to work. You have a number of people in your congregation whom God has placed there, whom God has called to reach their neighborhoods, their workplaces, their schools, and they just need to be trained. That's the biggest thing I think that we're missing is training our people to be missionaries and holding one another accountable to doing that effectively. It's not difficult. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we just have to be faithful in that. And again, that starts with the pastor, right? That does start with you building relationships as you have the opportunity and sharing the gospel, and then being able to tell your people about those encounters and encouraging them to do the same thing.
Yeah, we've got one more of these to go, but just a word of encouragement. Your church doesn't have to die. The fact that it is existing right this very moment, right where it is evidence that God put it there and ultimately has a plan for it. It's not there by accident. It's not, oops, I didn't mean to put a church there. That's not how God works. And, circumstances shouldn't dictate your potential or the outcome. Only God can do that. And with him, Luke 1:37 says, nothing is impossible. So be encouraged, Pastor. Your church doesn't have to die. And one of the ways that your church can thrive is to reach your community. So teach your people to be missionaries, move ministry outside, celebrate the legacy, fall in love with Jesus. All of this kind of stuff really ties all of these 6 that we've covered to this point together. And next week we have one more. Give us a little sneak peek at what's to come.
Yeah, the next one is churches die because they fail to follow pastoral leadership. We touched on this a little bit in a couple episodes ago, but we're gonna dive into that one specifically, and what it looks like when churches consistently reject the leader, whom they called, by the way, to lead them, and how that almost never goes well.
All right. Well, be encouraged, and may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel we declare. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.
What's wrong with you people?